Hi, I'm Simon K. Jones, and you're listening to the audio version of my ongoing serial Tales from the Triverse. You can leave comments and find a lot more over on the newsletter at simonkjones.substack.com. And this week we have The Escape from Bruglia, Part 2. Previously, an arrest warrant was issued for Detective Lola Stiles. She has now gone on the run with her partner, Princess Darilla. Bruglia, 3202, Frostfall. They'd been on the road for days. The Bruglian wastes were so called for good and obvious reasons, with vanishingly few real settlements outside of the sprawling city itself. There were plateaus and there were canyons, with caravans snaking their way along and through both. Travelling across the tops of the mazes and following the networks of bridges was more direct, simpler, and generally safer, at least in terms of unpleasant encounters. It was also the fastest way to run out of water and to bake in the sun. The latter was less of an issue during frostfall, but cooler did not mean any less dry. The alternative, descending into the shadows of the canyons, made for a more winding path. The gaps between the mazes formed a maze that was impossible to navigate for anyone unfamiliar with the territory or without a good map. The canyons often narrowed to slender ravines, ideal for ambushes and robberies. There were frequent choke points. It was also the only way to find occasional running water, with some gorges still holding the last trickle of the river that had once carved them. Darilla had insisted on going low. Lola tried to imagine she was merely hiking in Wales or across the craggy landscape of Northumberland. She envisioned trees and grasses in place of dust and sand, saw mosses blanketing the rocks and climbing up the walls while waterfalls poured from above. The sort of holiday she'd loved as a child. That wasn't the Bruglian wastes. The Bruglian wastes were dry, hot in the day, near freezing at night, and entirely unforgiving. Darilla hunted when she could, affording them a sinewy lizard or a tough-fleshed snake. During the day she was able to kill them with a gesture, a simple spell that closed a vital artery or airway. No wonder the gangs had feared her, and that she'd wielded such power and respect in Bruglia. All of that Darilla had given up to accompany her into the wilds. There had been no indication that she would be implicated, and could have stayed behind living her opulent life of travel and diplomacy and orgiastic parties, but she'd abandoned it all to be with Lola. Of course, it didn't escape Lola's notice that the blame could also be placed firmly at Darilla's feet. The so-called evidence that had been pinned on the SDC crew was intrinsically tied to Darilla's underground railroad. That they'd been framed wasn't a surprise. Lola had expected something like it for months. But that she'd helped to set the stage was agonising. After she'd found out about Darilla's foolish involvement, she'd worked with the city guard to crack down on the remnants of the gang. It had been a risk, but nobody would believe any of the gang members if they brought up Princess Darilla's name. Clearly it had still given someone an idea, one of the conspirators at the heart of Backer's investigation. None of it mattered anymore. The SDC was gone, inasmuch as it mattered. The others were likely under arrest, pending some kind of show trial. Lola had escaped, but to what purpose? "You know," she said to Darilla as they trudged along a wide, dried-out canyon, "under other circumstances I'd be loving this." Darilla wiped the sweat from her forehead, spreading a line of dust and dirt. "How is that exactly?" Lola spread her arms wide. "Adventure! On an epic journey across Palanor. It's everything I always wanted." "I love the way you say the word adventure. Nobody on Palanor says it like that." "See," Lola said, jabbing a finger. "You all take it for granted. Palanor is a land made for questing. You don't get that kind of thing on Mid-Earth." "What sort of thing?" "Grand landscapes, epic tales." "You likely were living in the wrong place, darling." "Fair point," Lola said, shrugging. "London is London." "Everything becomes normal if you live it long enough." On they went. They stumbled upon a merchant encampment at a crossroads, a semi-permanent oasis of sorts, where the caravans convened to resupply, rest weary bones, and catch up on the latest news from Bruglia, as well as the regions beyond the wastes. "We need more of everything," Darilla said, pulling her mask up a little higher to obscure her face. "Our supplies were starting to get worryingly low in the last 2 days." Lola nodded. I could do with some fresh underwear. Darrella smiled. What sort of place do you think this is? It's not one of your supermarkets with discount clothing. You never know, Lola said, throwing her an admonishing scowl. She'd been camping during her teenage years, but the truth was that Darrella had been keeping them alive on the long walk from the city. It had become obvious even to Lola that their water was being rationed, and she'd started to notice the weight she'd lost from never quite eating enough. Did you know this place was here? I'd heard of it, didn't know if it would still be here when we arrived. Darrella pointed towards a row of stalls. I'll go and find us supplies. You go over the other side and scout out the caravans. See if any of them are heading south. We might be able to get a ride. The idea of resting her feet was deeply appealing, so Lola nodded and made her way across the site, all too aware of the sores on her soles. There were stalls and large market gazebos, all set up around a huge central tent that was erected below a wide overhang from the cliff, which appeared to be a makeshift tavern of sorts. Parked on the far side were lines of caravans, pulled by all manner of creatures. Horses and camels she recognised, but there were Palinor exclusive species as well, 6-legged, reptilian, feathered, large and small. It was a menagerie of draft animals. "Hello," she said, approaching an Ainfar man that she presumed to be the leader of one of the convoys. "Where are you headed?" The man looked up from the animal he was grooming, his face caked in sweat. "Kukeko?" He was speaking Piayan. Darrella had warned her that the further from the city they travelled, the less likely she was to encounter English. The official language at the Triverse only radiated so far from Bruglia. He'd asked her a question. In her time in Bruglia, she'd picked up some vocabulary through osmosis and had taken some classes when she'd scrounged the time. "Waonipa?" she said, hesitantly, in what she presumed was a terrible accent. "Need travel." The man frowned, looking at her as if she was an idiot. "Hai puapua hoa mani," he muttered, then pointed down the row of animals and carts. "Mao kanapa." Lola looked at where he indicated. There was a woman, human, perhaps in her 50s, sat on a folding deck chair sipping a cocktail of some sort. She raised the glass, then waved at Lola. "Why are you talking to my animal handlers?" The woman sized Lola up as she approached. "And how long have you been walking? Your shoes are a mess, dearie." "You speak English?" Lola said. "I do." The woman grinned. "Well done for noticing. And I notice that you have a very interesting twang indeed. Not from round these parts." "I travel a lot." "I bet you do. What's your name, girl?" "Lucy." They'd agreed on new names to use while on the road, just in case word of the arrest warrant had travelled ahead of them. "Well, isn't that lovely? I'm Jacinda. What can I do for you today? Looking for work?" "Looking for travel, perhaps a lift, depending on where you're going." Jacinda nodded and displayed a wide array of teeth as she smiled broadly. "So you're looking for work. Wonderful. Can always do with a few more hired hands. A few always drop off along the way, if you know what I mean." They'd have to pay for travel one way or the other, though Lola couldn't help but think that Darrella would be a better place to barter. "Which direction are you going in?" "Nod towards Bruglia, so you can forget about that." Jacinda shifted in her chair, its metal legs straining a little. She pointed to one of the canyon exits. "We're headed down that way, southwest until we hit the edge of the wastes. Then we'll be turning west and heading for the coast. Any good for you?" "It might be. What's the cost?" "Are you a fighter?" "Not really, though, my friend. If you're not a fighter, then you can join your new best friend down there." She pointed back towards the Ainfa, cleaning the animal. "Keep the wheels turning, keep the wagons rolling. Make sure my animals are pulling. I've got cargo that needs to be places. You help me with that, I'll help you get away from whatever it is you're getting away from." "I'm not trying to get away from anything. I wasn't born yesterday, so don't patronize me. We leave at sunup. If you want to join us, be early." That'd been easier than expected. Success on her first inquiry. Darrella would be pleased. "One other question," Lola said. "One more, then get out of my sun. Do you know if there's somewhere here that might sell clothes?" "Course there is," Jacinda said, snorting loudly. "People who show up here after a long journey have needs. In this order: drink, food, sex, sleep, and then a fresh pair of panties and shoes that aren't going to cut your feet to ribbons." She shifted again in the seat and rolled her eyes. Damn, what do you think us merchants are? Savages? Thanks for listening. You can leave a comment and find some behind-the-scenes info over on the newsletter version at simonkjones.substack.com.